Sri Lanka is no longer a bankrupt nation. That is what the President of Sri Lanka said upon receiving approval from the International Monetary Fund Board to the Extended Fund Facility Supported Program bailout package to Sri Lanka. Now, just days back, that was close to midnight on the 20th of March here in Sri Lanka, we received news of the approval received by the IMF, and the President yesterday in Parliament confirmed the receipt of $330 million as the first tranche of the program of about $3 billion to Sri Lanka. It has been a tough journey. But to talk about the way forward, what is in store for Sri Lanka, the people of Sri Lanka, the corporates and businesses in the country, I've invited to studios an individual who has worked through this process, who's looked through this process, and who has ensured that the strategies in place are being implemented. A warm welcome to you, Governor Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe.
Thank you, Indiri.
The central bank, together with you, the President, the government officials, congratulations in order to all of you. The 17th IMF program, but it's not going to be an easy task. The next steps could be tough or easier. What is your outlook?
Obviously, if you look at this is 17th program. The earlier, the main difference between this program and what we had earlier was that all 16 times before we sought IMF bailout packages for balance of payment crisis, which means declining reserves, lack of foreign exchange for us to support all the imports. That was the reason, main reason that we sought IMF bailout. But this time there are two crises. One obviously was balance of payment issue we already had. If you can remember back in March, a lot of issues in terms of foreign exchange reserves and everything. And in addition, our debts, government debts, first time became unsustainable and increased to unsustainable levels. This is the first time in an IMF program that we had to deal with that situation. There's two crises. Both are related, but balance of payment crisis, debt crisis. This is why it took a little bit longer than what we thought. First to reach staff level agreement on 1st of September. And then from that point onwards, get the IMF board approval from 1st of September to 20th March. It's about little over 6 months period. So usual times within about 1 month after staff level agreement, that would go to the board. But this time complication was that we had to obtain credible and specific financing assurances from all bilateral official creditors. That took little longer time because there's an additional process that we had to follow. That's why it took little longer time, but compared to a lot of other countries going through this crisis earlier, actually we reached this level from staff level to board approval in a record time. So countries, those who are dealing with both sovereign debt crisis and balance of payment crisis, not a single country in my understanding had reached this level to that level in the record time. That is the, I think, key milestone and the good achievement. That's first part. So then your question is, what is next? So as I started, now we are going to financing assurances. So there are two parts. One, if you look at the IMF documents that is already in public domain, it's published in the website and it was tabled in the parliament as well, all information now in public domain. Anyone can understand what are the conditions, what are the things that we have, our commitment under the IMF program, all are there. And then there are two, again, this is a two-pronged approach going forward. One is we have to ensure the program reforms measures that we have committed so far, we need to continue to implement all these structural reforms, fiscal and monetary policy measures, everything we need to continue in the same direction during the next 4 years. There's a 4-year external fund facility which will support by financing of 2.9 billion from the IMF. The second parallel track is to ensure address the debt crisis, where after we obtaining financing assurances, next step is to negotiate with official creditors and also commercial creditors on the completion of debt restructuring process, so that we will complete that process, so that from that point onwards, it will ensure for the government, sovereign, will have a less debt service burden going forward in next, say, for example, next 10 years. So long-term, restoring long-term sustainability from unsustainable debt level now is the next thing that we have to achieve. So these two things will have to happen next several months. Once we complete that, then it's like a normal autopilot kind of a thing that we have to go through the program. And once we get the current debt relief, the lower debt service payment, then we are set for next 4-5 years. And that will give us much needed space for the economy to grow, for people's income to grow up, and inflation to come down, for us to build up more reserves and more sustainable, affordable debt service payments, and also support the poor and vulnerable who have already been worse affected as a result of the crisis, and ensure social safety net for these people, and also address medium to long-term structural reform that will enhance our ability to grow, the capacity to grow of the country will have to enhance. And as our next important one is to ensure, unlike in the past, we have to ensure we should be able to earn more foreign exchange as a country, so that we will not go back to this kind of balance sheet crisis. We should be able to earn ourselves foreign exchange so that we can meet our import expenditure, foreign exchange expenditure, without raising a lot more external debt to address that situation. That is the other part that we would like to ensure going forward, to prevent going to the IMF again and getting back to this kind of crisis again.
You mentioned, Governor, that in the next 5 years, it would go on autopilot. Beyond that, and inflation and other key factors will come to our expected levels. Is that the time frame you're giving? And the second question, in the short to medium term, how much do you expect the people to tighten their belts, or is the suffering over?
No, you see, what I meant was to get to a more stable, sustainable growth path to much sustainable level in next 3-4 years' time, if you go in the same direction. But in terms of sufferings and in terms of tightening the situations, all I can say, all the difficult tightening policies government and central banks have already implemented. In my view, what we expect going forward, I would not expect further increases in taxes going forward, because government has already increased taxes to significant levels. If government would be able to widen the tax net, if government would be able to get the more people to pay taxes, then obviously government can bring down the tax rate. Other part is the government should be able to, with higher tax revenues, should be able to give some relief in terms of increasing public sector wages, those who are fixed for some time now. That's the second relief. And in terms of from the central bank side, what we expect in the near term, the inflation we had peak of 70% in September last year, and as a result of tightening policies that we were implementing, we were able to bring down the inflation from the peak of 70% that had in September, now 50% last month. By end of this year, towards December, I am confident the inflation will be down to single digit, about between 4 to 6, around mid-single digit we will be. That is another big relief. And the most important relief that people are going to get after this program is the availability of foreign exchange for their normal activities. For example, if you can remember last year, why economy contracted that much last year? Because businesses, industries, services, they could not import sufficient raw materials or sufficient inputs, or they could not spend money for foreign exchange, because there were no foreign exchange available because of the balance of payment crisis. That is the reason we went through this negative economic growth and contraction of the economy, because of lack of foreign exchange. What we'll do with this IMF program, and I can say even before, we were able to relax that situation. For example, if you can remember 7-8 months ago, even for a parent who would wanted to send money abroad for their education, even $1,000, $5,000 for their children studying abroad. That's a huge difficulty. I was getting so many letters where parents are urging, please facilitate for us to buy $4,000 from the bank. That was the situation we had. But now, even before IMF came in, from January, February, the last couple of months, there was sufficient foreign exchange available within the banking system. And as a result, all the petroleum, needs of petroleum imports, gas, pharmaceuticals, they have foreign exchange availability within the banking system without central bank intervention. And even before IMF came in, if you can remember, currency started to appreciate. Why that happened? Because there's a lot more foreign exchange liquidity in the system, and we were also able to build up our reserve position even before IMF came in. And this IMF coming in, the additional 300 million came yesterday to our reserves. So with that, going forward, I can see, not to the great extent, I mean, we are not still in a comfortable level, but for normal economic activities to happen, there are sufficient foreign exchange available. That was the major constraint why economy was not growing and recovering. Now what I see now, next 3 quarters, from now onwards, we have 3 full quarters for people to do business and available foreign exchange, and that gradually pick up economic activity. And while we are building up our resources to much more comfortable level, and over a medium term, we build up to much more stronger position, so that this balance of payment crisis would be stabilized, and people can come back to normal activities with the available foreign exchange, and also that should support growing foreign exchange earnings. As I said earlier, the tourism, remittances, exports, goods and services, all sectors should be able to perform better going forward. That will stabilize the situation. And together with fiscal policy, I talk about later.
You talk about greater fiscal discipline, the ability for greater fiscal discipline as well as improved governance as a result of these conditions also set by the International Monetary Fund. This is the 17th time, as you also acknowledged earlier on. But do you think this could be our last time that we go to the IMF? When we look back about how India turned around after their 1991 IMF bailout, EFF, do you think you yourself, together with your other officials and with the political will, that we could turn the country around, the economy around going forward?
Yeah, that's exactly a very good example what India did. Not only India during the 1997 crisis, that was in 1991, the Thailand, Indonesia, Korea, all these countries faced similar plus-open crisis. But that was the last time all these countries went to the IMF, and they never went to the IMF. Since then, they will not go to the IMF again, I believe, in the future as well, because of the right things that they did. So for Sri Lanka also, why we had to go repeatedly 16 times is that what happened usually in the past, we present a program to the IMF. This is our reform program. And they accept that. They say, okay, we'll take this program and we will, it's like we mortgage. We commit ourselves and they say, okay, we will give you money, you implement all these things. What usually happen after some time, those are all difficult reforms. Once you implement with the political pressure and pressure from the people, once you get the IMF money, we can like now can gradually normalize, and people forget what the difficulties, and they ask different things, and they take one step forward. After that, take 2 steps backwards. That's why we had to go again. So this time, we had to ensure we will go in the same direction, even 1 step forward and small steps gradually in the same direction. That's an important commitment. Why I say this is feasible this time? So this is the first time people felt the need for reforms. People felt the difficulties and pain of economic crisis. First time. We never had this kind of crisis. People had now have better understanding. Not only people representatives in the parliament are the ones who represent people. And I can see even bipartisan support that I see even in the parliament when it was presented. Obviously, people can criticize here and there, this is not good, that is not good. You can fine-tune that. But broadly, I can see people in this country, bipartisan support, I can see that. That is a very positive sign, which means I think I am confident that the direction that we have to go in terms of reforms, in terms of measures, fiscal consolidation, the monetary policy reforms, will continue to go in the same direction. So country now has learned a lesson. So this is a good lesson that we have learned. I mean, difficult and the hard way that we learned that lesson, but I think we have to ensure we won't do that mistake again and move in the same direction. As a result, we will not go back to the IMF again like what India did, what Thailand did, what Korea did, what Indonesia did in the past.
To add to that question, Governor, from unprecedented crisis to tough reforms and going forward for a more sustainable recovery, do you think we have, or do you think we will take the right necessary policies that will be consistent regardless of change of government? Because this has been a significant stumbling block in policy making in Sri Lanka, leading to much of the difficulties and challenges we faced.
Yeah, that's also a good question. So if you look at how we can continue to ensure that we are going in the same direction, irrespective of the administration. So this is what people should be asking from politicians. So they are elected representatives. So that's the one thing, getting people's buying in and getting overall people's support for these things to happen. Then the representatives all will ask what people are asking from them. That's the one thing. Other one is mainly the understanding, is communication, and also other part is that everyone should understand anything going beyond or differently, and we will go back to the same problem. So this is where I think important part, and also the other important point. For example, that is why we need to have a strong institutions and mechanism and rules and regulations in place to ensure, at least prevent us going back. For example, these are some of the reforms that we government has committed. One is the central bank independence. So that is to strengthen the central bank independence, so that central bank would not be under any administration, would not go back to implement or have fiscal dominance in monetary policy. That is prevent that. Fiscal consolidation, the fiscal rules. There is a Fiscal Management Responsibility Act, which is supposed to, for the Parliament to take actions if they miss the target. It is only explanatory thing, and go to the Parliament, explain, and then go back to the same thing. But in this reform, the commitment is that you bring in several necessary laws that even the government within the Parliament, they will have to follow the same path, fiscal consolidation. If there is a deviation, there has to be automatic reversal and adjustment. And they come back to the same path within the institutional, strengthening institution, having those laws. That is why we call strong fiscal rules that should be followed by the Parliament under fiscal management, and also other process of independent budget office, that they independently look at all the government budget proposals under any administration, give their views, these are sustainable or not, or feasible. That independent checks and balances should be there, and independent institutions, the judiciary, the central bank, and other independent commissions through proper checks and balances, and strengthen those institutions, and ensure those independent institutions would be able to carry out their policies, undertake those measures independently, what is right for the country, not the most popular thing, and right policies, not popular policy, if that is the case.
We spoke about the Central Bank Act previously too, when I was able to host you at Hydepark. The Treasury Secretary is not going to be part of the new Monetary Policy Board. If you can explain to us about this and how such act is going to strengthen any reform agenda that will be undertaken going forward.
Yeah, this is one important reform, and if I can tell you, even current Central Bank Act, what you call Monetary Law Act, has, in my view, has sufficient independence. If someone wants to, Monetary Board exercise independence, it has sufficient independence. But there are certain weaknesses. If you look historically why we are in this situation, mainly because of the fiscal policy, and without understanding proper fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy by the Parliament and Minister of Finance, monetary policy for the country by the central bank, independent authority. So when the fiscal policy dominating monetary policy and fiscal policy influencing central bank to print money as and when they want to print money, And this is a major weakness. How that happened in the current Monetary Law Act, Central Banking Act, there is a provision the government, Minister of Finance, can influence central bank to print money in simple terms to finance budget deficit. And the government can influence, because there are two ways. One is there is a provision in the law. Second, not Secretary of Treasury sitting at the Monetary Board as one of the members. There are 5 members, governor is the chairman of the Monetary Board, Secretary of Treasury is the ex-officio member, then 3 independent appointed members.
Right.
But when Secretary of Treasury representing Minister of Finance, government at the Monetary Board, obviously there is a tendency, because he has to, he or she will have to deal with their mandate, that is fiscal policy. When they find it difficult to finance budget deficit out of the market or other sources, obviously there is a tendency they would influence. That has been happened throughout several decades since central bank was established. That is the reason why we were having very high inflation historically in this country, because of the fiscal dominance and fiscal influence in the monetary policy. This is to address that. This is why Secretary of Treasury is no longer a member of the monetary body that governs the central bank. That's the first part. Second one, it will be prohibited for the central bank to directly finance budget deficit through subscription through the primary auctions and buying treasury bills directly from the primary auction. That's the second source. Once you address those two, one can address this by policy even current. I can remember in 2017-18, Monetary Board itself took a decision. We will no longer finance the budget deficit through the primary auctions, and we will no longer do that. But later, the change of the administration, new Secretary of Treasury came in, new governor came in, and they completely changed that within the Monetary Board decision. So while having this in the law, then Monetary Board would not have discretion. It would be a rule, and Secretary of Treasury would not be sitting in the Monetary Board and influencing somehow indirectly or directly finance. So he is no longer at the board. So that is how we have institutional structure preventing monetary policy independence and preventing influence of the fiscal policy into monetary policy. That's why it's important. Monetary policy actually, if you want to, someone knows to understand, monetary policy is the country policy for the whole country financed by the central bank. All over the world, country's finances is the regulation of country finances is the authority of the monetary authority, central bank. Authority for public finance, even by the constitution, is a fiscal authority to the parliament. So what's the difference between public finance and the country finance? So if you look at the whole country finance, that includes your money in the bank, my money in the bank, and public finance is what is in the consolidated fund, taxpayers' money in the treasury account. If you look at the whole country finances, treasury finance is only 20% of whole country finance. It's a subset of the whole country finance. So if the treasury, that 20% trying to control money in your account and my account, then it would be a disaster. Would you like the parliament regulating money in your account, or ability for you to borrow from the bank, or interest that you would earn for your money, your private money in the bank account? Or would you want independent institutions having this regulation and do it with the independent accountability, with accountability? This is a difference. So the public finance is taxpayers' money. So that's perfectly fine. Treasury collects taxpayers' money, Treasury borrows money for conservative fund. Then its complete authority is the parliament. They have the full authority to manage public finance. But they should not have authority to manage someone else's money, your money and my money in the bank. That is why you need independent institution. That's the difference between fiscal policy and the monetary policy. People are usually confused between this, parliament has full authority on finance. It's not correct. They have authority on public finance. Central bank authority on the country finance, even in terms of setting up the exchange rate, setting up the interest rates for the whole country, not only for the 20% of the government, the whole private sector, all savers, all importers, all exporters. it should be the authority, independent authority setting that for the country, not the elective representative by the parliament.
It's time we take a short break here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. We're talking about how the reforms agenda will be driven going forward to sustainable recovery of the Sri Lankan economy. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back. We are in conversation with the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. Dr. Weerasinghe, I think something I wanted to ask you, are you content with the decision you took back when you were in Australia, when you were invited to take over the position as Governor?
Yeah, obviously when I was asked, I thought it's my responsibility, given my knowledge, experience and kind of exposure, international, local, that I had as a central bank. So I think now I made the right decision, and I was confident that I knew what should be done to get the economy back on the recovery path. Only the doubt I had was that whether I would be able to. It's not only central bank. It has to be a teamwork from the central bank monetary policy, as I said earlier, and from the Ministry of Finance fiscal policy, and Institute of Enterprise reforms by other ministries. It has to be a combined package and teamwork by cooperating all the different policy makers going together in the same direction. The only concern I had whether I had this cooperation, coalition going forward in the same direction. So far I have seen there's a bit of instability somewhere in between at the beginning, but now I have a stable situation going in the same direction irrespective of the administration. We have seen several changes in the government.
And the political support?
Yeah, I think as for the central bank, we need to operate independently, irrespective of what the administration. I think we should do what is right for the country. So we will be doing that under my leadership. I am clearly clear about that. And what is needed is a supplementary, supportive fiscal and other structural reforms going in the similar, same direction, that all together cohesive and better for the country. So that I think my expectation, obviously, when I thought about it earlier, I thought we would be able to get the financing, this I unlock in somewhere December, as I mentioned even earlier. But there was a delay, I think 3 months delay, given the situation. I think probably I can be happy about it now.
But now, I read somewhere an economist, international economist, has said that this is not going to be a silver bullet for Sri Lanka,
of course.
that there is a difficult path. You've acknowledged that during the first few minutes of our discussion as well, but President Ranil Wickremesinghe said in Parliament yesterday that the second round talks with creditors will kick off somewhere in the 3rd week of April upon parliamentary approval. There have been concerns and questions raised in Parliament too. However, with approval received, if you can give us a breakdown of how these debt targets are going to be met. Now, the question is whether this IMF is also another loan. Is Sri Lanka going to be dragged into further debt burden? And how are we going to honour our outstanding debt? What does it really mean? What is the timeline for when we start repaying all these loans?
Yeah, that's, I think, good question that you asked. If you look at, our issue, as I said, restoring debt sustainability. For that, even now, numbers in the public domain, what are the debt targets that we need to achieve to restore the sustainability in next 5 to 10 years? For example, the IMF itself, it says, but based on their sustainability analysis, we have to bring down current debt to GDP ratio from about, say, 120, and including public guaranteed debt 130 to around below 95% in 10 years time.
Right.
And then debt service payments as a percent of GDP, foreign debt service payments, to around annual basis 4.5% of GDP, not more than that. That is the debt service target. That's the debt stock. And then other technical thing, what they call gross financing need, currently about 30-35%, will have bring down to 13% in 10 years time. These are the path that we achieve. For us to achieve that path, the important element of that path, for us to reach that path, is mainly how we can restructure our debt service obligations going forward. So this is where the next important step for us to start discussing with both bilateral, official and commercial creditors with an intention to bring down our debt service burden and restructure our obligations and obtain a more relaxed debt relief so that we can afford to make those debt service payment. As a result, we can meet those targets. That is one key thing. That is the first important step that we have to work parallelly from this point onwards, and we are in the process. We have to fast track that process and complete that debt restructuring within about 2-3 months. That's what our target. Then the second part to ensure that debt target. The second important part is from the fiscal side, is turning this primary deficit, this is a technical term, primary deficit of fiscal balance into primary surplus of, now last year it was 3.7% the deficit, primary deficit of 2022. By 2025, we have to convert this primary deficit into primary surplus of 2.3%, and we have to maintain that level over a period of next, say, 5-10 years. That will also bring the debt sustainability, bring down the target part. Other one is to at least to recover the economy in real terms, growth at least 3% going forward. So these are the key targets. So we have to ensure we go on that path. For us to be able to reach those targets, other supporting reforms are state enterprise reform that we'll talk about later. So once we do that, then obviously this is the important part. This is why I say this is an important milestone. This is a beginning of a new era. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of a new path that we have to take. Instead of going back to primary deficits that we had for several, last 75 years, only 3 years we had primary surpluses. Now we are committed to having primary surplus continuously on 25 onwards. So that's why I said this is a different path. And in terms of foreign exchange earnings, current account deficit, we had said 3-4, sometimes 8% of deficit. We have to ensure about 2% deficit consistently going forward. So these are the path that we have to ensure. We have to have policies to ensure we go in that path. So this is the thing that we would like to go, and this is a beginning of a new path. All I can say, the most difficult reforms already been implemented. So what we can say going forward, it could only be beneficial, and this tightening policies could be gradually relaxed, and people's income or country's income can be basically gradually increasing, and that will give some more cushion. And in terms of reserves, the next question, at what level of reserves?
Reserves. That
last in March, April, liquid amount of resources almost zero, but we had Chinese stock only 1.45 billion. That's what we had at that point. Now, end of last month, we are gradually building up, and we had 2.2 billion of gross resources end of January. I think we all know during the month of March, we had much better foreign exchange situation. We were able to build about $500 million even from the market before IMF came in. IMF gave another 300 million. With that, there's a significant increase compared to the level we had. But that is not sufficient. That's why I say it's not the end of the story. So we need to continue to build up our reserve position to much more comfortable level that we had earlier. For example, if you look at before the crisis, end of 2019, we had about 7.6 billion level of gross official reserves. That was even having the debt service obligations for 6 billion per annum in the next 4-5 years. So if we restructure debt properly, if we bring down the debt service obligation, I think coming back to $7 billion, $8 billion would be much more comfortable level compared to what we had earlier. Because when you had 6 billion debt service payment next year, and if you had only 7 billion, that is not a comfortable level. But if you bring down the debt service obligations to 6 billion, 2 billion, then 7-8 billion is still a sufficient level. But what I say now, last month 2.2 billion, we had to build up. We can't build up resource in a very short time, unless you get a significant amount. This is where what we expect. Already announced, IMF will give us 3 billion, and the ADB World Bank will get another about 7 billion. That is a good help for us to build up resource. And in addition, once the confidence comes back the IMF endorsement of our country's program, there will be a lot more foreign direct investments. Investor confidence will be improved significantly. And as I said, there will be a lot more portfolio investment, high investment in foreign direct investment, and doing all the regulations and doing it business easy. All these things will make Sri Lanka as a more attractive investment destination. That will also strengthen our reserve position through foreign direct investment, through promotion of exports of goods and services, through recovering the tourism industry and getting more remittances from people who already gone abroad and sending more money into the country. We see those trends in the positive direction now. If we are able to make that direction and make Sri Lanka as a much more attractive place to invest, I am confident that we will be able to overperform and restore the sustainability earlier than what is envisaged in the IMF program within the next 4 or 5 years.
But so you expect to achieve it before?
Achieve it before. I mean, that we should be targeting that. That's how we can give the relief to the people sooner than better, and can come back to normal situation. People can freely do all their activities and people can do business freely. So we need to achieve that sooner.
Governor, you said this will be the beginning of a new era. Certainly these anti-corruption legislation will be very welcome. But some of these conditions put forth by the IMF are conditions that we might not be able to implement on our own. Without such conditions being put, the question is whether there will be the will of the politicians as well as other officials to bring these reforms together. So do you see this going forward, these changing Sri Lanka's path, the economic recovery path into a more sustainable and a more realistic manner?
Yeah, I think this is the other important part. What you see in this IMF program, what we did not see earlier, is another pillar. So as I said, fiscal policy, monetary policy, structural reforms are 3 key pillars. But in addition, this addressing governance challenges and corruption vulnerabilities. There's a 4th pillar in this program now. So this is where I think even with that IMF program, country should be doing this. So what is the incentive for the government, for the country to implement this is that now government has given commitment that they will address corruption vulnerabilities, governance issues. So that's a part. Really, what's the incentive for the government to do that? Because if we follow that path, implement all these things, and we will get financing support, we will get investor confidence, so we can come out of the crisis early. And also one important part, if we implement this 4th pillar, corruption vulnerabilities and governance challenges, that will certainly improve investor confidence, saying that now Sri Lanka is a place, you don't have to worry about the corruption. There are proper rules, regulations, laws are in place. There are strong institutions to address all these things. There are ways and means to basically punish people who will be engaged in corruption, and there are proper strong institutions. It's not only the, say, police or bribery commission, it's addressing corruption vulnerabilities in several government institutions. For example, the tax concessions. Now, one of the commitment, as I already say, is in published, is that if government is giving any tax concession or giving say vehicle permit, this is a tax expenditure. It's a taxpayers' money. Those things will have to be published. People get to know out of taxpayers' money. These are the people who are getting benefit out of this. These are the companies who will get benefit out of this. So even corporates who are getting benefits concession out of tax expenditure, they have to list. These are then people go to know, okay, these are the people who would getting benefits, and it has to be open and transparent. And even systems in the customs, in revenue, excise, other government institutions, even central bank, in the Ministry of Finance, implementing fiscal rules, improve transparency, all these things are part of the 4th pillar. I think this is why this time, because we know there are a lot of allegations and a lot of talks about the corruption and not being addressed all these issues. This is, I think, important reform. If we do that right, I think we will come into a different kind of country. And people will look at Sri Lanka as a country that is basically minimize or reducing corruption in the country. That's the important part.
You spoke about supporting reforms and tightening policy that will be eased. If you can, I don't want to wait until the last minute of the program to talk about it, but what supporting reforms are we expected to comply with?
Now, this going forward, as I said, now for example, look at this state-owned enterprises report, where the state-owned enterprises utilities especially, now there's a clear policy approved by the Cabinet, Parliament, cost reflective pricing mechanism. So that's one first important reform where we should ensure those state enterprises will not be making losses even in the short term. Even if they make losses, there will be no support from the government is prohibited to give them taxpayers' money to cover those losses. We make sure banks will not finance their losses out of the depositors' money. They have to survive themselves. That's the first part. To ensure they will not be wasting taxpayers' money going forward, cost reflective pricing. But then the problem is that even cost reflective pricing, we may not be competitive if our electricity prices are too high or petrol prices are too high, then we can't make a country competitive. How do you make country competitive? Then you need to make those institutions also highly competitive. They should be able to compete with the private sector, and they should be giving that benefit to the people in this country in terms of more competitive institutions. That's why next part is to restructure those institutions and make those much more efficient and make it more profits and share that dividends with the government. Those have been paying all this several decades, and also pass the benefit to people in terms of more competitive, lower energy prices, low electricity tariffs, low water prices, more competitive other services. That's the whole idea. The structural reforms going forward, those should need to be. That's why I say that difficult part government has already done. Adjusting cost structural price is there. Now next is we have to wait for the benefit of that by restructuring those institutions and get the more efficient and efficient service for the people of this country. The whole country can be competitive. This is one of the complaints you say when people say, why Sri Lanka is not competitive in doing business here? So electricity prices are still higher relative to, say, India or Bangladesh. So we have to make this pricing much more competitive by restructuring those institutions. That's the next step. So that's why I say inflation. We will ensure it will be 5% next 10 years. So there will be interest rate regime. If inflation is 5%,
and interest rates?
That's why if inflation is 5%, then we should be able to maintain single-digit interest, at least for corporates and good customers. So that is where we had some time ago. And for us to be companies, corporates and private sector SMEs to be able to borrow at single digit or even closer to double digit, close to 10%, is to ensure inflation is 5%. So this is our commitment, the central bank. So we will deliver that commitment and we will ensure inflation is around 5%, and that certainly facilitate businesses. This will also give a reasonable return for depositors, your money in the bank account, not giving 0%, 2%, 3%, 5% interest. Maybe you need to give at least 6-7% interest for your deposit. And out of that money, business can borrow at around 10%. So that's a reasonable balance between the savings and borrowings, and at a reasonable price that Sri Lanka can be competitive. If Sri Lanka needs to borrow at 20-25% for a long period, we can't be competitive. This is why in the going forward, we're going to see these easing conditions in terms of interest, in terms of taxes by widening the tax base so that everyone can pay lower tax rates, and also not giving unnecessary concession out of taxpayers so that taxpayers' money can be utilized for more productive purposes, for public investment, and to support poor and vulnerable. So social safety net is assured and protect those poor people, and they can bring up their living conditions.
Governor, where do you think the rupee will settle by the end of the year and going forward?
Yeah, that's an important question, but I can't give you a specific number. I tell you why. So now our exchange rate determination regime is a market-based, demand and supply-based exchange rate determination. That's why we are seeing the movement in the recent past where when the supply was high, exchange rate appreciated. Rupee appreciated from 306.70 level to came down to 315 even. And then when on the days that import demand, exchange demand for picking up, it went back to 330, 40, close to 45 level. And then recently with the IMF money coming in, again there was a high supply. Then rate came down back to 320 level now. It's completely market driven based on demand and supply, and also will settle on the economic fundamentals in the medium to long term based on what the current account deficit, what's the fiscal deficit. Those are the key factors. This is where it would be difficult for anyone to credibly, predict where the exchange rate would be next month, month after. This is all depending on several factors, like I said, import demand for imports, demand for exports, foreign exchange inflows, foreign direct investment inflows, capital flow inflows. All these things are the factors. This is why there was a recently company called Fitch Solutions. It's not Fitch Ratings. Solutions made a prediction saying that it will be 309 by end of the year, on the basis of assumption, saying, quoting the president's statement, saying we would have $6 billion per annum debt service going forward. This is in fact factually incorrect. This is why we restructured debt, because we need to bring down the debt service burden in next several years, not from $6 billion per year, to bring down a much more sustainable level. If we don't restructure debt, if we start repaying our debt service, meeting our service obligation without restructuring, obviously exchange rate could be depreciated even more, because we know we don't have sufficient resources. If we are to pay $6 billion per year, then there is a lot of pressure on the exchange rate. So this is where I think one is a wrong assumption and wrong interpretation, and also is technically no one can confidently and accurately predict for any country the exchange rate, which is determined by the market demand and supply. That is it's a difficult bet to win for anyone. My request for anyone, please don't bet on exchange rate. It will be a losing bet. We will make sure you will lose if you bet on exchange.
We have a few minutes on the program. Finally, what are the next steps? This is what I asked you at the beginning, but in terms of finalizing these matters, creditor talks, and then ensuring that Sri Lanka complies IMF reforms agenda, but at the same time, going forward, what internally do you expect to implement?
So, I mean, there are a lot of things that we have to implement. I know time to talk about. If you look at there are three areas: fiscal policy reforms, monetary policy reforms, structural reforms, and correction one. Those four areas, there are, if you look at the document, there are about, for even this year, there are about 20-30 actions that we have to implement. That is on the policies and reform side. The other side, we need to complete the debt restructuring process. The second part. Those are the immediate short-term actions that we have to do. And also the program-wise, in the EFF program, is that every 6 months, there will be a review, and what we have committed to do within this year, they come and review whether we have implemented those things properly within timelines. Then only we will get the second tranche. Remember, for us to get the tranche by tranche every year, 2 times the 2 tranches a year, we have to ensure the timeline and the commitment they have committed. We have to show that we have implemented on time, so that they will give us money and we can go to the next step. That's why this is step by step. Next year for 2024, there will be different benchmarks. Once we reach one level, then next benchmarks will be how we going from there to there, and what are the benchmarks. So those benchmarks will be set for 2024, and then we will agree to that end of this year in the next review. And once we complete that to 2024 benchmark, then we 2025, there will be even higher benchmarks. How we can go from 2-3% growth to 5% growth. Those are the second. So this is a continuous process, reviewed twice a year, every year, 6 monthly reviews, and we make progress on the basis of depending on how we have implemented all these things so far, within that period.
Thank you very much, Governor, for your time here at Hydepark. I think your first local media interview upon receiving approval of the EFF program. You're the 17th Governor
I'm
of the
17th
Central
governor, yes.
Bank, overseeing the 17th time that Sri Lanka
That's a coincidence.
coincidence, but I don't have to give your credentials out. As a career central banker, and you've worked with as an alternative executive director for the International Monetary Fund, overseeing India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka as well. If
That's our constituent, yeah. So
Right,
already accepted.
right. So thank you very much for coming back on Hyde Park, and you've come back to take over this position as central banker upon retirement. So we look forward to engaging with you and talking to you going forward on how these reforms, programs and other strategies are being implemented.
Thank you very much, Indira.
Thank you. We had with us Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe, joining us here at Hyde Park to talk about Sri Lanka's recovery path post-IMF EFF program. We'll see you again next week at the same time with yet another episode at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24.